In a small Pennsylvania town, the ground has been burning for more than 60 years. The fire still burns today, and despite multiple attempts to stop it, no one knows exactly when or if it will ever go out. If you're here because you value careful investigation over sensational storytelling, consider subscribing. We explore America's most unusual places with facts, not fiction. A like helps us reach others who think the same way. Now, let's look at what happened in Centralia. Centralia is located in Columbia County, Pennsylvania, roughly 2 hours northwest of Philadelphia. It sits in the Appalachian coal region, an area that once powered much of America's industrial growth. The town was founded in 1866 and named after the Centralia Mining Company. Like many towns in eastern Pennsylvania, it was built on top of coal. The entire region sits above vast underground coal seams that were mined for decades. At its peak in 1890, Centralia had a population of nearly 3,000 people. It was a thriving coal town with churches, schools, hotels, and businesses. The town was built around mining, and mining was everything. By the mid-1900s, Centralia's population had declined. The coal industry was shrinking. Mines were closing. By 1960, the population was around 1,400. The town was quiet but functional. People lived normal lives. Then in 1962, something happened that would change everything. On May 27, 1962, the Centralia Borough Council authorized the burning of trash in an abandoned strip mine on the edge of town. This was a common practice at the time. The fire was meant to clean up the landfill before the upcoming Memorial Day celebration. What happened next is documented in municipal records and geological reports. The fire in the landfill was not fully extinguished. It spread into an opening in the rock. That opening led to a coal seam beneath the town. Once the fire reached the coal, it began to burn underground. Coal fires are different from surface fires. They burn slowly, fueled by oxygen seeping through cracks in the earth. They can spread horizontally through coal seams and vertically through fractures in the rock. They are extremely difficult to extinguish. Within months, it became clear that the fire was not going out on its own. The first official acknowledgement came in 1962 when the borough hired a mining company to dig out the burning area. The effort failed. The fire had already spread beyond the area they could access. Over the next 2 decades, multiple attempts were made to stop the fire. In 1969, engineers drilled holes to monitor the fire's spread. They found it had expanded significantly. In 1978, a gas station owner discovered that the underground fuel tanks had heated to dangerous levels. The temperature inside the tanks was over 170 degrees Fahrenheit. In 1981, a 12-year-old boy named Todd Domboski fell into a sinkhole that opened suddenly in his grandmother's backyard. The hole was 4 feet wide and 150 feet deep. Steam and toxic gases poured out. Todd was pulled to safety, but the incident made national news. That event changed everything. By 1983, Congress allocated $42 million to relocate Centralia's residents. Most accepted the buyout and left. A few refused. In 1992, the governor of Pennsylvania invoked eminent domain and claimed all properties in the borough. Residents were given until 1994 to leave. Some complied. Others stayed. By 2000, the population had dropped to 12 people. As of the 2020 census, 5 people still live in Centralia. They are the last residents of a town that no longer officially exists. The fire continues to burn. Geological surveys estimate it could burn for another 250 years. Several patterns emerge when examining Centralia's history and the fire's behavior. First, the fire spread unpredictably. Engineers expected it to move in certain directions based on the layout of the coal seams. It did not always follow those patterns. In some areas, the fire advanced rapidly. In others, it seemed to stall or skip sections entirely. Second, the ground temperature varies dramatically across the town.
Some areas are cool to the touch, others are dangerously hot. Sinkholes have opened in places where the fire weakened the ground. Steam vents release carbon monoxide and other gases. Third, vegetation has responded in unusual ways. In some sections, trees and grass grow normally. In others, the ground is barren. Heat has sterilized the soil. In a few spots, plants grow year-round because the warmth prevents frost. Fourth, the fire's exact size and location remain unclear. Because it burns underground, it cannot be directly observed. Monitoring is done through temperature readings, gas detection, and periodic drilling, but the fire's boundaries are estimates, not certainties. There are also abandoned attempts to stop it. Trenches were dug, barriers were built, sections of the mine were flooded. None of these efforts succeeded. The reasons for failure vary. In some cases, the fire had already spread beyond the containment area. In others, the methods used were not effective for underground coal fires. And in some instances, funding ran out before the work could be completed. One of the most debated aspects is whether the fire could have been stopped early on. Some engineers believe that if aggressive action had been taken in 1962 or 1963, the fire could have been extinguished. Others argue that the fire was already too widespread by the time it was detected.
Several theories attempt to explain why the fire started, why it spread, and why it could not be stopped. The most widely accepted explanation is straightforward. The fire started because of the landfill burning in 1962, and it spread because the conditions were ideal for an underground coal fire. The coal seams were accessible, oxygen was available through fractures in the rock, and the fire was not extinguished quickly enough. This is not a mystery. It is a documented sequence of events. However, there is debate about whether the landfill fire was the true origin. Some local historians believe the fire may have started earlier, possibly in an abandoned mine. They point to reports of smoke and heat in the area before 1962, but these reports are anecdotal and not confirmed by official records. Another theory involves negligence. Some argue that the Borough Council was aware of the landfill's proximity to the coal seam and proceeded anyway. Others believe the fire could have been stopped if the state and federal government had acted more quickly. These are questions of responsibility, not science. There is also speculation about why certain containment efforts failed. Some believe the fire spread through unmapped tunnels and voids left by earlier mining operations. Pennsylvania's coal region features hundreds of miles of abandoned mine tunnels, many of which have never been recorded. If the fire entered these tunnels, it would have been nearly impossible to track or contain. A less common theory suggests that water used in some firefighting efforts may have made the fire worse. Coal fires can react with water to produce hydrogen and carbon monoxide, both of which are flammable. Some engineers believe that flooding certain sections may have accelerated the fire's spread rather than extinguishing it. There is no folklore or supernatural element to Centralia. The fire is a well-documented industrial and environmental disaster. But the persistence of the fire and the failure of every effort to stop it has made it a symbol of something larger. Centralia is not just a story about a fire. It is a story about decisions, consequences, and what happens when a problem is ignored for too long. The fire raised questions about the government's response to environmental disasters. Early attempts to fight the fire were underfunded and poorly coordinated. By the time serious resources were allocated, the fire was already out of control. This pattern has been repeated in other American disasters. Centralia also serves as a case study for underground coal fires. These fires are more common than most people realize. China, India, and Australia all have long-burning coal fires. Some have been burning for decades or centuries. Centralia is the most well-known example in the United States, but it is not the only one. The town has also become a cultural landmark. It inspired the video game Silent Hill and has been featured in documentaries, books, and films.
Tourists visit Centralia to see the graffiti-covered remnants of Route 61, which was closed in the 1990s due to fire damage. The cracked, buckled highway has become an unofficial monument. For the few remaining residents, Centralia is still home. They have fought legal battles to remain. They argue that the fire is not directly beneath their properties and that they are not in immediate danger. The state disagrees. The legal status of their residency remains unresolved. Centralia also raises broader questions about abandonment. When does a town stop being a town? When does the government declare it uninhabitable? When does the post office close? When does the last resident leave? Centralia exists in a legal and social gray area. The fire in Centralia burns quietly, mostly out of sight. The ground is warm in places. Steam rises from cracks in the earth. The few remaining residents go about their lives. Geological surveys suggest the fire will burn for another 250 years, but those are estimates. No one can say for certain. What is certain is that Centralia was abandoned not because the fire destroyed it, but because the cost of stopping the fire was deemed too high. A decision was made. It was cheaper to move the people than to extinguish the flames. That decision raises uncomfortable questions. How do we measure the value of a community? When is it acceptable to walk away? And what does it mean when a problem becomes too expensive to solve? Centralia is still burning. The town is still technically there, even if almost no one lives in it. The fire does not care about borders, populations, or politics. It simply burns. And perhaps that is the real story. Not the fire itself, but what we chose to do and not do in response. Centralia is a monument to a problem that was never solved, only abandoned. The question is not whether the fire will eventually go out. The question is what we learn from the town we chose to leave behind.